Thank you, Chair. We're now live on YouTube. When you're ready, would you like to start the meeting?
Thanks very much, Debbie. Good afternoon and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Strategic Planning Committee on the 22nd of June 2021. I'm your Chair, Councillor Dan Ledger. I would like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. Strategic Planning Committee members are here in the Council Chamber at Blackdown House with other participants taking part remotely. And as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout and be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout this meeting, and we reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent on an internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we are not able to reconnect, we will consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all mobile phones are turned off or are on silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background level noises. Please do not interrupt during the meeting, keep points short and try not to repeat points that have already been made. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand, or whatever colour it is now. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any member of the public who wants to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, eastdevon.gov.uk. I would like to warmly welcome Councillor Jeff Pook to the committee, although he has sent his apologies for today, and thank you to Councillor Thomas for his valuable contributions. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. When you hear your name, please unmute your microphone and confirm you're present by saying present at Blackdown House. When you've confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with you, Councillor Ledger.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Present here at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
I'm here at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Present here at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey will be joining us later. Councillor Blakey.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Present online virtually.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Howe hopefully will join us later. So I'll move on to Councillor Ingham.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Present at Blackdown House.
Thank you. And Councillor Skinner, have we got Councillor Skinner back with us yet?
He's still down with Strata downstairs.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Okay, Chair, I can confirm we are quorate today.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So we'll start with agenda item 1, which is public speaking. Wendy, have we had any public speakers?
No public speakers today.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move to agenda item 2, which are minutes of the previous meeting. So if anyone has any comments they wish to make on the set of minutes from the 27th of April, please do so by raising your electronic hand. If I have no hands raised, I'll take that as an indication that you all agree to the previous minutes. I see no hands raised. So those are agreed. We'll move on to agenda item 3, which are apologies. Wendy, you've already touched on those, but can you just reaffirm them?
Yes, so we've received apologies from Councillor Pook. Councillor Howe was hoping to make the meeting, but if he doesn't, I'll record his apologies. And Councillor Bailey will be arriving late today.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So agenda item 4, declarations of interest. This again will be done by a roll call. Just to remind members, if you are declaring an interest, could you list the item number, what type of interest that is, and why they're declaring the interest? Thank you. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with you.
None. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
I'm an Exmouth Town Councillor, which is relevant to any discussion of the local plan, and that's a personal interest.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
No declarations.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you. Just declaring as a Coulson Parish Councillor, similar to Councillor Davey, perhaps relevant to the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott, although I could hear you, it's quite faint. I think you might need to move your microphone nearer to your...
Oh, I'm sorry. I was doing my whispering Bob Harris act again from
No,
Cabinet.
that's
Is that a
much
bit better?
better.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it was your Colleton Parish Councillor, did you say?
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Again, as a town councillor for Cranbrook, anything that turns up that's relevant to Cranbrook, that would be a personal interest.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Just to declare, obviously, that I'm a Broadclist Parish Councillor as well, and I live in the Broadclist Station area.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
A personal interest in agenda item 8 as the clerk to All Saints, Chardstock and Newton, Poppleford and Hertford Parish Councils. Also agenda item 13 for the same reason, another personal interest, but also as a member of Axminster Town Council's Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
And thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Wendy. As a Broadclist Parish Councillor and resident of Broadclist, I feel that probably every single item discussing the local plan and any kind of future provision is relevant. So, I mean, I was just going through them and I think they all apply. So all of them. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I'm assuming we haven't got Councillor Skinner yet. So maybe when Councillor Skinner appears, we can get his declarations later.
I'll call him into the meeting when he arrives.
Thank
He is
you.
sat here just having troubles getting on. So agenda item 5 are matters of urgency. I can confirm that there are no matters of urgency to discuss. Agenda item 6, confidential and exempt items. I can confirm there's no confidential or exempt items. Agenda item 7, we're starting to get to the main part of the agenda, is the joint strategy for East Devon, Exeter, Mid Devon and Teignbridge. And it's over to Ed Freeman to present his report. Over to you, Ed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So this first report is following on from a report that was brought to members on the 20th of October last year, where Strategic Planning Committee resolved to recommend to Cabinet that the Council agree in principle to prepare a joint non-statutory plan for the Greater Exeter area in partnership with Mid Devon, Teignbridge and Exeter councils, with the support of Devon County Council. That recommendation went on and was agreed by Cabinet and has also been agreed by all of the partner authorities. So there is unanimous support for the production of this joint non-statutory plan, following on from the demise of the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan last year. Members will recall that the intention here is to consider a way of addressing the shared and interlinked planning concerns that affect the four authority areas, help to fulfil the legal duty to cooperate, demonstrate continued joint working by the authorities on planning matters, which is considered to be vital to levering in funding to help support the delivery of any strategy and infrastructure moving forwards. Also to help to establish a recognisable brand for the area, which could also assist in funding bids, and also enable the local authorities to promote and share expertise and jointly commission work, which then presents potential cost savings and benefits in terms of excuse me, consistency across the area as well. So this report before you today follows on from that and starts to look at the scope, the resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements for the preparation of this plan. In terms of the scope, it basically stems from obviously those principles for the reasons for preparing the plan, but looks to provide this opportunity for an ambitious future and growth agenda for the area, demonstrate a commitment to joint working, There's still the key strategic issues facing the area, act as a prospectus to lever in external funding to help to overcome these issues around unlocking development, and also that it should be a living document which can be easily updated, which I think is one of the key benefits of it being a non-statutory plan, is obviously doesn't need to go through examination processes and can be more readily updated as the new local plans come forward among the partner authority areas. So in terms of resourcing of the plan, the leaders and officers have looked at a number of options in terms of how to resource this plan, mindful of the fact that obviously things have moved on from when we were working on the GESP, in terms of all of the partner authorities are now full steam ahead preparing local plans for their areas, and obviously that's consuming a lot of the resource that might otherwise have been engaged in work on the GESP. So options around dividing the work equally between officers of the 4 authorities, re-establishing a dedicated team like we had with GESP, externally recruiting a project manager or consultants to prepare the plan, or a combination of those have all been looked at. Fundamentally, it's considered that the best approach now is to engage with consultants to prepare the joint non-statutory plan on behalf of the authorities. As I say, resources in each of the partner authorities are now firmly dedicated to preparation of local plans, which doesn't really leave any capacity to really produce the joint strategy. It's also worth noting that monies remain in the GESP budget that will cover the cost of recruiting consultants to undertake this work. The report then goes on to try and set out a timetable for doing this, looking to obviously engage with consultants if that's members' wish towards the end of the summer, and then go through a process of engaging with members and other stakeholders through the early part of next year, with a look to getting to a draft plan and publicly consult early in the summer next year, in the hope of reaching formal agreement and adoption of that plan September, October time next year. I say there are sufficient funds available within the GESP budget to cover the cost of that, including the public consultation. And there are governance arrangements detailed that are summarised in the diagram in Appendix B in the report, but in summary, these look to put in place a range of bodies that reflect the various groups that would need to be involved in the preparation of the plan, from the leaders group made up of the leaders and relevant portfolio holders for each of the authorities, the principal officers group, essentially the chief executives, taking in advice from bodies like Homes England and the Local Enterprise Partnership, as well as a project assurance group made up of myself and the heads planning for the various authorities, and various member working groups and officer working groups stemming from that as well. So the Appendix B diagram hopefully explains the role of each of those groups, but obviously key to remember that the decisions being made in relation to this plan are all held by the relevant councils and their committees. So none of these governance groups we're talking about actually have key decision-making powers in terms of the content of the plan and its adoption. So hopefully that's a useful overview of where we've reached in terms of this work. Just coming back to the recommendation, members are asked to consider and approve the scope, resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements set out in this report, preparing the non-statutory plan, and recommend those to council, who ultimately need to make the decision on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Ed. Just before we go out to non-committee members, I'd just like to welcome Councillor Skinner and Councillor Bailey to the meeting. Councillor Skinner, do you have any declarations of interest you wish to declare at this time?
Thank you, Chair. I apologise for my problems with the iPad, and at this moment in time, no, I'm sure if something comes up, I will let you know in due course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey, do you have any declarations of interest you wish to declare?
Thank you. Yes, and I'm sorry I was late. I was having my vaccination. I would like to make two personal declarations of interest. One is that I'm a West Hill Parish Councillor, and the second is that I'm a Devon County Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll move to non-committee members to speak on this item. Councillor Paul Miller, you wish to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I was really struck by Mr. Freeman's comment about a recognisable brand, and I just sort of thought, didn't we have a recognisable brand in the GESP? Why don't we just keep calling it the Greater Exeter Strategic Plan? The website's still up. The only difference being, from what I can see from the report, is that this plan will be non-statutory, whereas before it was obviously statutory, and the big difference being that our local plan won't be impotent. I think it's really important that we retain the sort of Greater Exeter brand, because I think, you know, as we go forward, the idea of the Greater Exeter City region has a really bright future. And when you look at the rest of the country, when you want areas to get first-class infrastructure, the answer tends to be metro mayors. So I can sort of see that Greater Exeter brand leading us down that route. So my question is, you know, to you, Chair, and also maybe the leader, is have there been discussions amongst the authorities on what the branding might be at this stage? And also obviously to congratulate you on the speedy progress following our withdrawal from the statutory plan. And obviously, you know, best wishes with the progress. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Miller. I'll bring in our grand leader at this point, because he is the one that sits at these leadership meetings. I'm just sat as a willing participant. So I'll pass over to Councillor Paul Arnott at this point.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Miller, for that question. I can say that the one thing that all the leaders agreed on at the first meeting of this proposed joint strategy for East Devon, Exeter, Mid Devon and Cambridge was that we didn't want to call it the GESP. And I don't think I should unduly detain this meeting really with the reasons why, but everybody realised we need to move on to something else. To be honest, I know that Ed mentioned the idea of a brand. I think he's using that as a technical term, as a kind of a place-making entity that might be understood more by developers, landowners, and the people who are on the kind of sharp business side of this, than something that the general public are meant to understand about a huge joint project. I think that's what Ed has in mind. If he and his officers have come up with some very sexy brand in the last 2 weeks that I don't know about, I'd love to hear about it. I think probably I don't see Exeter going metro mayor direction anytime soon, by which I mean the next century. And I think one of the difficulties that GESP had was that areas on the extremities of it, where I live, Collerton, Seaton, Axminster, we really do business and look to Taunton, Bridport, Dorchester as much as we look to Exeter. So that was one of the difficulties, I think, with the Greater Exeter idea, and I understand that applies with the far distant parts of Timbridge as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnott. We'll move to Councillor Brewster-Sarum, and then we'll come back to Ed just to cover any questions that are left unanswered. Councillor Sarum.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask, has there been any issues arrived at for the public consultation? How will that work out? So I just wanted to get some clarification on that. So I see you've got the timetable there in 4.1, and I just wonder, how are we going to feed back on those consultations? Because obviously, if the consultations aren't what we're expecting, how are we going to handle issues that come up that way? So I'd be grateful for an answer on that, please.
I think it would be from the many groups that Ed discussed earlier, but Ed, over to you for a more full answer.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the timetable obviously makes some assumptions about how quickly each stage will progress. And obviously the expectation is that we'll have an engaging public consultation next summer, and that will enable us to move forward quite quickly to finalising the plan and formal agreements. Obviously, if there are significant issues that need to be addressed coming out of that, then obviously the timetable might need to extend to accommodate that. Clearly, the hope is to have a fully engaging consultation and take on board the comments that we receive, and if necessary amend the plan accordingly. But obviously, given the scope of the plan, it's going to be a very high level strategic plan, And in our experience, it's quite hard to engage people in those kind of issues. So that will be a challenge. But yeah, I mean, the timetable's not fixed, so obviously that can be extended if further time is needed for members to understand the feedback that's received and amendments to be made to the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. That's most helpful.
Thank you for that, Ed. If there's no non-committee members wishing to speak, we'll move it inside committee. So Councillor Paul Hayward, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Arnott's, I think, has been looking at my notes, because my question from this, one is to welcome what we're doing, but also to just seek clarification and assurance that we are cooperating just as closely with the three authorities that Councillor Arnott mentioned, Taunton Deane, South Somerset and West Dorset. I appreciate they've each got their own goings on at the moment, which probably takes their mind away from planning. But it goes without saying that if you look at the Hela allocations or the Hela submissions, which we're going to consider later, Axminster is taking a fair amount of has a fair amount of interest. Collerton and Seaton has a fair amount of interest. We've already seen in this report that Lyme Regis is looking to upline to solve some of its problems. Chard is encroaching rapidly to its south through Forton and Tapworth into East Devon. So there's a great deal of activity along this eastern boundary. So really it's just the assurance that we're not just looking to the other authorities within what was the GESP, that we're also talking to the three authorities to the east equally cooperatively, to make sure that what they do doesn't impact adversely on us or vice versa. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Hay. We'll take a few speakers and then go back to Ed. So next up is Councillor Davey. Councillor Davey, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask Ed what he sees as the key differences between option 3 and option 5 in terms of the overview of the drafting of the plan. One is a project lead and the other is a consultant, and obviously those will be different people. One would be employed, one would be subcontracted. But I wonder what kind of operational differences you see that making, and which option, what you think the strengths and weaknesses of each would be.
Thanks very much, Councillor Davey. Councillor Rylance, you're up next, and then we'll go to Ed.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I have a couple of questions, actually possibly three. So firstly, my question, because it appears in quite a few of these documents we've been given today, is you talk a lot about repurposing the guest budget. Are we able to do that without sending it for a decision, a formal decision? Because the money presumably was allocated to the guest project specifically. And does that need to be formally repurposed rather than just used for roughly the same purpose? That's my question one. Question two is, was about, sorry, I'll get there in a minute. Oh yes, about the duty to cooperate. So in another part of this document, you've identified one of the aspects of duty to cooperate. Could you enumerate what those current requirements are and how you see them changing if this white paper gets through as it is? And I'm very glad to hear that all 4 local authorities are now updating their local plans and getting them up to speed hastily. So that actually wasn't a question, that was a statement, the last one. So it's 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ed, over to you for those, just to cover off those 4 questions, and then we'll carry on with speakers.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yes, so going back to Councillor Hayward's question about engagement with other authorities outside of the GESP area. I mean, in terms of the non-statutory plan, we're not required to fulfil the duty to cooperate because it's non-statutory. So that doesn't apply, but obviously we are engaging with them through the duty to cooperate on the local plan, as are the other partner authorities. So logically, those conversations would extend into this non-statutory plan as well, and we would look to fully engage with them and coordinate with them in the way that we will under the main duty to cooperate on the local plan. And as has been said, we've got a further report on the agenda coming up that looks at some of those issues that we think are relevant to that, and the parties we're looking to engage with, which includes those neighbouring authorities that aren't part of the Greater Exeter area. So very keen that we do that, and clearly that's important to this objective of trying to coordinate and engage with our partners and coordinate growth across the area. So very keen that we do that. In terms of Councillor Davies' comments, I think the main difference really, the project lead was envisaged to be a single person, a project manager to sort of lead resources within each of the partner authorities on production of the plan. And I think that would have been necessary had we been doing that in terms of resourcing. You may remember with GESP we had a project lead, a project manager, but he left shortly before we got to the proposed consultation that was brought to members and ultimately not taken forward. So there would be a need to replace that role if we were to move forward in terms of resourcing production of the plan internally. The downfall of that is really discussions with the partner authorities, and indeed our own situation means that there simply isn't those resources to support a project lead in terms of production of the plan, and hence this proposal about going to consultants who would provide the full range of resources. So there would be a project lead within that consultancy group, but also consultants themselves doing the legwork and the consultation on our behalf as well. So I think feasibly in terms of resources, we reached the conclusion that that was the only viable option unless we were to fundamentally delay production of local plans across the Greater Exeter area, which based on the steer we had from the leaders didn't seem to be something that would be acceptable. In terms of repurposing the budget, it's a good point. I'm not aware that there is any need to come back to members with regard to that. That hasn't been raised as an issue previously. The money was set aside, I think, right at the start of the process, so not necessarily specifically for guests, but for joint working and joint planning. And that money is still held for that purpose and would still be being used for that purpose. So I'm not aware of any issues with repurposing that, but happy to look into that and talk to others in finance and legal in case that there are any issues and any need to bring that back for a member's decision. In terms of the duty to cooperate issue that Councillor Rylance raised, clearly, as I say, that there's another paper on the agenda later on that goes into further detail on the duty to cooperate and its requirements. So maybe more appropriate to pick up on those issues there. But as I say, we will obviously be working with the neighbouring authorities both within and outside of the GESP area. I think there was a point about the white paper. Obviously, the government have talked about doing away with the duty to cooperate as part of the white paper. We need to see how those proposals progress through Parliament. I think political spectators are saying that won't necessarily have an easy or quick route through the houses. So we need to see what happens with that, and we need to progress on the basis of the current legislative requirements, which is that we need to fulfil the current duty to cooperate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Freeman. Over to you, Councillor Kevin Blakey.
Thank you, Chair. Another question for Ed, I'm afraid. Who would you envisage, in terms of it being an individual or a firm, would actually be engaged to act as consultant on this? Because I think if you look in Google for a joint strategic plan consultant, you're struggling to find any kind of sensible result. But what sort of qualifications would you be looking for within that firm, or as I say, with an individual?
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. Councillor Paul Arnott, you're up next.
Thank you. Yes, just to pick up very quickly, and on Ed's reply to Councillor Davies' question, really, which is what is the difference between 3 and 5? What is the difference between effectively an internal officer at one of the 4 councils and an independent consultant? And this was a very important distinction in discussions. And as Ed has pointed out, in the sort of last year of the GESP, it was very much led by one particular officer, albeit of course working with others at Timbridge. And a number of us here today would have gone over to the meetings at Timbridge to discuss GESP. That officer then left and has taken a lot of the rationale behind having an internal officer at one council sort of leading it. And in a way, it just made a logical sense then to, and as Ed has said there, the resources aren't there within each of those 4 because of the amount of work that's being done on the local plans, which must not be delayed. So it does make sense to go to external consultants. I think Councillor Blakey and I would be on exactly the same page as wanting to make absolutely sure it's the right consultant that is chosen. But I'm sure that a good process will be followed on that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Councillor Ingham, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed from Mr. Freeman's introduction that he was saying we should favour option 4. And I notice when you look at option 4, it starts with completed and initial draft in-house. So it looks as though perhaps yes, Mr. Freeman, you favour this one. We've already started this. That's why you favour it. Yet when we look at the cons of the 5 options, there's a plethora of them allocated to option 4. Why is it that you favour option 4, or in your introduction you intimated that was a preference, either of you or the leadership? Could you explain that, please?
Ed, over to you. I'll leave that to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just on that last point, it's actually option 5 that's the favoured option, which is to bring in consultants, a group of consultants to prepare the joint strategy on behalf of the authorities. So obviously they will be using all of the work that's been gathered already in terms of GESP and the evidence base that was produced. But due to the lack of resources in each of the partner authorities, it's envisaged that that would be the way forward, would be to engage with consultants. In terms of the expertise needed that Councillor Blakey raised, I think fundamentally, obviously, it's planning resource that we need. So planning expertise and knowledge that's needed to engage this. That takes in a wide range of expertise, including infrastructure delivery, transport planning, economic development, housing. So it'd be a full range of planning and related expertise that we would need. But I think any consultants also need to be experts at public consultation and engagement, because fundamentally we want this to be a plan that's engaging for people to use and understand, and have an engaging consultation exercise as part of its production and to inform its production. So I think those are just briefly sort of the key expertise we would need. We'll obviously be preparing a detailed brief to go out to tender and go through a full and open tender process. Part of that will obviously be making sure that any consultants putting themselves forward declare any conflicts they may have, and that those are appropriately handled, so that obviously mindful that a lot of the consultants may well operate in the area on behalf of other parties, which I think was raised by the leader, and is clearly something we need to be mindful of and make sure is covered off appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ed. Councillor Allen, over to you. You're on mute, Councillor Allen.
Thank you very much. One of the original
I'm sorry, Councillor Allen, you've put yourself on mute again. We didn't.
That's better. The original GESP looked at each authority absorbing its own housing need. And then with Mr. Freeman's agreement, it was proposed that we took Exeter's housing need into account. Now, I'm very concerned that when we draw up a brief and get an independent consultant to look at the particular situation, we don't get back into a situation of being dumped on by Exeter's housing need. And although there is consultation and cooperation needed, I'm very concerned that we start on the basis that we do not favour each authority putting housing need onto each other. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. I think I can pretty much assure you that that won't be happening with this new non-statutory plan. Ed, do you want to touch on that anymore, just for the extra detail?
Thank you, Chair. Well, just to say that I certainly never agreed that, or nor do I have the authority to agree that the council take any of Exeter's housing need, and I don't recall the council ever agreeing to that. The principle remains that each authority consumes their own smoke in terms of housing need. Obviously, if that were to change, we would obviously have to bring that decision to members.
Thank you very much, Ed. With no other speaker.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Of course you can, Councillor Allen. You asked so nicely.
Thank you. I'm just very concerned that in the brief, because I've had experience with briefs being written with an intention that actually was distorted inside the brief. So I want to make sure that the brief to the consultant enshrines the words that each authority will consume its own housing need. And I wonder if I can put that as a formal proposal to the meeting.
Councillor Allen, we'll take Councillor Rylance, who wishes to speak, but could you actually work that into the original recommendation as a full recommendation to put forward, please? So Councillor Rylance, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a very quick question about the governance for the project. Who specifically within our local authority would be principal and the person who sits on the project assurance group? I mean, it's fairly clear from the other categories who they would be, but I'm not quite sure who the officers would be to sit on those groups.
Ed, over to you.
So in terms of the principals group, that's the chief executive, and the project assurance group is made up of the planning leads for each authority. So for this authority, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Allen, do you have a proposal that you wish to put forward? You're on mute.
Sorry, they keep muting me. I'm not sure what recommendations are being put forward. There's a set of recommendations on page 14. They don't relate to page 22, which is the favoured one that has been put forward. So I think it's important for a proper drafting of that recommendation rather than doing it on the nod. I would only ask that whatever recommendation is put forward ultimately to engage a consultant, it includes the brief that each area must include its own housing need. You understand the problem? The recommendation on page 14 and the recommendation 0.5 on page 22 is different.
So, Councillor Allen, can I suggest then that we keep the recommendation as stated in the report, but as part of the scope, we add into it that each partner authority assumes their own smoke and housing numbers, and that would be as part of the scope for everything that would be taken back to obviously council and to the partner authorities.
Yes, so long as we say that we're choosing 0.5 on page 22 so that everybody's clear what the recommendations are that we're voting on.
No problem at all. Councillor Ingham, you're on mute currently.
Sorry, in addition to that, as an aside, an informal request to Mr. Freeman and his team, when this comes forward in the future to Cabinet and to full council, can we have this very directly in black and white, exactly the detail of a recommendation, rather than anything loose, which is what we have this morning? So he understands what we're after. Thank you.
No problem at all. I'll ask, well, Mr. Freeman, could we bring these reports back to both Cabinet and Council when taking them further on for recommendation?
Certainly, I'm happy to look at clarifying the recommendation in the report. I think the report itself, if I recall, would go to Cabinet as part of the papers, and then I think it goes on to Council as the minutes of Cabinet, if I recall. Shirley may be able to correct me if I'm wrong there. But certainly in terms of the report going to Cabinet, I can look to refine the recommendation to clarify the points that have been raised, certainly.
Thank you very much. Shirley, you want to come in at this point?
Just to say that as Ed has said, that it would be going back to Cabinet in any event for them to see the recommendation. If members wished to clarify in the recommendation and in their motion that option 5 is the approved option, then that can be incorporated if whoever is moving the recommendation, the motion, wishes to insert those words into their recommendation.
Chair, if Councillor Allen is proposing that, I'd happily second that. I do think it's important to have option 5 in there in the wording of this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Councillor Allen, just to confirm, are you okay with proposing that?
So we're clear that the wording stays as it is in the recommendation on page 14, but there is a subsequent sentence that says that the committee recommends option 5 and that any brief includes the statement that each council will consume its own housing need. That's the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arnott, and you're happy to second that, just to confirm?
I'd be very happy with that. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor.
Mrs. Shaw, before anyone changes their mind, can we take that to a vote? Thank you very much.
Apologies, I was just checking page 14 recommendation is the same as I have a note of. You could just give me a second to scroll down to it. Yes, members, those of you in the chamber, the motion is that Strategic Planning Committee recommends that Council approve option 5 as set out in the report, and the scope, resourcing, timetable and governance arrangements set out in this report for preparing a non-statutory joint strategy for East Devon, Exeter, Mid Devon and Teignbridge councils, and that as part of engaging the consultant and their brief, each authority will consume its own housing numbers. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or please raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
Okay, for the benefit of those watching at home, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 8 votes in support, that's not including Councillor Sarah Chamberlain, who I can't include, and 1 vote against. So that's, no, I'm up to 9 now, sorry Chair. 9 votes for, 1 vote against and no abstentions. So that is carried, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we'll move on. Agenda item 8 is the initial feedback report. Just checking I'm not on mute. For the local plans issue and options consultation. And Ed Freeman, again, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall that we consulted on local plan issues and options reports from January to March this year, and that at your April meeting you received a draft feedback report which effectively summarised the responses we'd received through the online portal. We've now had an opportunity to go through the additional 150 respondents that didn't respond online and instead sent in consultation responses in the form of letters or emails or other forms of responses, and managed to summarise the full comments now. So there's a total of 702 people or organisations that have responded to the consultation, and appended to the report is now a final issues and options consultation feedback report that summarises those comments received. So you'll see as you go through the appended documents that for each question you've generally got a diagrammatical representation of the responses. So in terms of question 1, a pie chart showing the responses, yes, no, or blank or no response. And then underneath in each case, you've got a summary of the comments that were received to that question in the sort of free-form boxes and things that were attached, and also summarising those that came forward outside the online consultation but have responded on those issues. I won't go through each question in turn. We looked at some of this in quite a bit of detail in the previous meeting, and the trends and general responses aren't fundamentally changed by summarising the additional responses received outside of the online portal. As we said last time, I think there's quite a range of responses and quite a lack of consensus on a number of key issues. But hopefully it's a useful summary of the responses we received. As you'll see from the reports later in the agenda, where we're then bringing a topic paper on a key issue, we're also summarising the responses that we've received and responding to those through the topic papers. So I wasn't intending to summarise in detail the feedback received. I will obviously pick up on that as we go through the different topic papers, both later in this meeting and in the upcoming meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed Freeman. Just for members, this is only a noting exercise. We have done this to death at the last meeting. And so can we just keep comments on what has happened new since the other 150 submissions, just because I am mindful of the time and how long this meeting will go on today. So if we haven't got any members from outside of committee, Councillor Bailey, do you have anything? I did.
No, I've just put my hand down. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So turning to page 50 of this document pack, which is page 24 of this report, there is an extensive outline of numbers that we might pick up from neighbouring authorities. I was rather surprised to see Torbay mentioned in here, because as far as I'm aware, we don't neighbour Torbay. Also, looking at the map, Lyme Regis does seem to have some bits of Dorset around it. So why they're not looking at those before turning to us? And this rather goes against what Mr. Freeman was saying earlier about us not picking up neighbouring authorities' requirements. It's in the second bullet point on that page, meeting on met housing need from neighbouring areas, duty to cooperate, etc., which actually we're not bound to anymore since we're no longer in GESP. So how does this square with our new reality? Thank you.
We are still bound through the local plan process to the duty to cooperate currently. Well, it depends on what planning reforms come through with the government, but we don't know right now. But Ed, do you have anything you wish to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, I mean, we are still bound by the duty to cooperate until any new legislation comes through. In terms of Torbay, they do obviously not an adjoining authority to East Devon, but they do adjoin Teambridge, and they adjoin the Exeter housing market area. which would be their point, is that they're saying they have advised through guests that Torbay is unlikely to accommodate its requirements under the standard method, and therefore they're expecting some of their housing need or wanting some of their housing need to be met within the Exeter housing market area. So that is an issue that we will have to address as we move forward with the local plan. We don't have to accept what they're saying. We don't have to accept any of their need. So I don't think there's any contradiction with anything I've said earlier in the meeting. It's just pointing out that in Torbay's response to the consultation, they have raised that issue, and that's something we will need to take forward through the duty to cooperate, both with Torbay and obviously with Teambridge and others who are the directly bordering authority to Torbay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. Councillor Allen, you wish to speak.
Thank you, Chair. If you look at page 33, then we can see what a disproportionate response came from those from 56 to 70 plus. And clearly, when I asked for the ORS study to look at different life stage requirements, the response there was also inadequate, but at least it gave us better clue as to what younger age people actually want. In other words, what I'm saying is that whereas the response is very gratifying, there are two elements. Firstly, the report's biased by excluding sections of response from landowners and being kept rigid in respect of key questions. And secondly, it's massively skewed to the older population. So whereas we should note the consultation responses and take reasonable account of them, I would like to make sure and recommend in the recommendations that the neighbourhood plan is given greater weight than ORS and the consultation report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Skinner, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I very much want to add my weight behind what Councillor Allen has suggested, because it is, if there's anybody excluded, then how do you have a local plans issues options report that becomes accurate in its data that comes out the other end of that? And although I can understand the perhaps people of a younger age who don't engage in these things, and it's more difficult when people are younger, they usually concentrate more on work and families and all the rest of it, and I do get that, but it is still a fact that it is their comments and their views and the, shall we say, perception views should be very much taken on board in going forward, because at the end of the day, when we've got the large majority of people between 56 and 70, and I'm still sorry, Chair, I'm still picking up through page 33 on the report that we have in front of us, and even to the point of 70 plus. So that is a large swing towards the older population, and there has to be some sort of form of balance. And if that form of balance, as Councillor Allen has quite rightly put forward, is there is more engagement on a local plan issue from a parish or local district issue, that when it gets back to the villages and the towns, there's more of a response through that particular part of participation, then I think that shows weight that we certainly should be adhering to. So I very much agree with what Councillor Allen has put forward, and if he is making a recommendation of some degree, then I'm very much in support of that and would support that, because I think it's only right, proper and fair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Ed, do you have anything you wish to just come back to on those points?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would just say, I think Councillor Skinner used the word excluded. I would just be clear, we didn't exclude anyone from being able to comment on this consultation. It was an open consultation for anyone to be able to comment on. We have clearly got an issue in that it didn't engage with younger people. despite our best efforts. There was a report on the last agenda where we detailed the comms strategy that we had used, and we did put a lot of messages out over social media and other avenues to try and engage with the younger generation. It wasn't successful for whatever reason, and we have got disappointingly low responses from that age range, and that is something we need to address in future consultations, and we'll be working with the comms team to see what we can do to address that and engage with the full age range of residents in the district in future consultations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Ryan, do you want to come for a second bite of the cherry?
Just quickly, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to say regarding the demographics, so our job as a planning authority is to plan for the future. It's not to plan for the things that people who respond now ask us for. We know we're not reaching the younger demographic. That doesn't mean to say that they don't deserve to have houses and things built for them. So we need to find a way to reach them, and we need to find a way to incorporate their needs into our decision making, and not just follow the lead of people my age and older on what we need in the future. So yes, they're not very present in this consultation, but my question is, do they really have to be for us to be able to make good decisions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does committee have any recommendations they wish to put forward at this time? I can see no other speakers.
I did put a recommendation on the table, which was seconded, sir.
Can you just confirm what the recommendation was again, Councillor Allen?
The recommendation was that the neighbourhood planning results should be given greater weight than other consultancy and other consultancy reports. The reason being that they are voted on by a much bigger number, and in some cases it was a high majority of the local population voted.
Thank you for that, Councillor Allen. Mrs. Shaw, where do we stand on this? Because it's not particularly relevant to the agenda item itself. It's just a recommendation that's stating that we give more weight to neighbourhood planning.
Yes, as through you, Chair. Yes, the motion, the recommendation of officers is that the committee notes the feedback report and the responses. I think that Councillor Allen's comments in relation to the weight to be given to the neighbourhood plans is more relevant to another area that members may be dealing with. Because to note is not to form any view. You're not forming a view on the results in this item. You are just noting what the results of our consultation are. It may be more appropriate for Councillor Allen to raise that point when we come to discussion of other local plan policies and issues that come forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Shaw. So in light of that, Councillor Allen, are you happy just to withdraw that and we just agree to note the report as stated, and we can bring up your points at a later date or a later agenda item? I know they are pertinent, and they are obviously, it's something that we need to look into. So it's not something that's going to be lost in the ether, I promise that.
No, the point being though that report does not give a good representation of the under 40 age groups, and that needs to be part of what we note. So if you would be so kind as to append an extra sentence saying that we note the lack of response in the under 40s, which needs to be appropriately corrected.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ingham is seconding that. It's something that obviously myself and Ed have spoken about, and it is something that we really want to push through the comms strategy moving into subsequent consultations, because we do want to gain a good view of the demographic across East Devon. We don't just want the over 50s deciding everything. It needs to be representative of our actual district. And that's speaking to someone who's still just 30. Mrs. Shaw, can we take that to a vote, please?
Yes, Chair. So the motion you have is that Strategic Planning Committee note the feedback report and the consultation responses received to the local plan issues and options report, and note the lack of response in the under 40s age group, which needs to be addressed in future. Members, those of you in the chamber, please press your green tick if you're in support of that motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, and raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
Okay, so for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. So, Chair, I have 7 who are for the motion, 1 against, and 2 abstentions, Chair. So that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw, and thank you very much, Debbie. Moving on, agenda item 9 is the Hela call for site submissions. And again, over to you, Ed Freeman, to present your report.
Thank you, Chair. So members will recall that alongside the issues and options consultation referred to in the previous item, there was also a call for sites for submission into our housing and economic land availability assessment process. So sites were submitted between January and March of this year to feed into that process. This report is intended to alert members to those sites that have been put forward, and also seeks members' agreement of a number of minor changes to the Hela process. So you'll see from the report that the council received a total of 359 site submissions, which is remarkably similar to the 353 we received back in 2017. There are, however, quite a lot of different sites. So 194 of the sites that come forward are new sites that we weren't previously aware of. 165 of them were previously submitted in 2017. So there's now a huge amount of work going on in terms of assessing those 194 sites afresh, and also reviewing the 2017 assessment of the 165 sites that we already knew about, to make sure that those are up to date and accurate to inform our local plan process. So there's a table at paragraph 2.2 that summarises the number of sites by ward, well, parish area rather than ward. And you'll see it's not a very even split in terms of there are particular areas of the district where sites have come forward and other areas where few or indeed none have come forward. And you'll also see appended to this report a series of plans of the district showing the sites that have come forward. So the sites shown in blue are the 2021 call for site submissions. Those in either red or a sort of brown colour on my screen are those that came forward in 2017. Work is going on to update the interactive map. So I know some members have been in touch to say that the interactive map that's on the website is currently still only showing the 2017 submissions. Apologies for that. I understand that Strata are working on updating that today, so hopefully the new sites should be on there shortly. The other part of this report, as I say, is about the Hela methodology. So this is something that some members may recall was agreed some time ago now, since we've worked together with neighbouring authorities to produce a methodology, originally in 2017, and it's previously been revised at various stages along the way, most recently in 2017 for the GESP. So paragraph 4.2, the bullet points highlight a number of really technical and minor changes to that methodology that we're now proposing to take into account latest guidance, specifically on deliverability and developability criteria that's detailed in the NPPF and PPG government guidance. And some other changes on how we take account of things like self-contained and communal accommodation, and simplification of some elements of the guidance in terms of housing densities and other areas. So very technical changes, but mindful that members did agree in 2017 the original methodology, and so seeking members' agreement to those changes to that methodology through this report as well. So the recommendations are that members note the report, agree the proposed next steps, which is obviously the assessment of the Hela sites to be brought back to members in the future, and the delegated authority, and the changes to the methodology that I've detailed. There's also this issue in terms of the methodology that as part of the Hela process, we form a Hela panel that would also more than likely want to review that methodology. Again, I suspect any changes will be very minor and technical, but recommendation 3 asks for delegated authority to be granted to myself as service lead and the chairman as portfolio holder for strategic planning to make any further minor changes that might arise from that review of the methodology by the panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ed. So can I just remind members that we're not today discussing any of the specific sites, and we shouldn't be wasting time on that today. That's down to the Hela process. So can we keep the actual comments onto the recommendations that are listed in front of us, and the process and methodology for it? So we'll start with Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I've got a few comments on the next steps. And I think my first comment is in relation to the Hela panel. And I don't personally feel that we've got enough information on the identities of who is going to be on that panel. And I would like to seek some clarification on, particularly in terms of the balance between developers, landowners and community representatives on that panel. Because I think if we're going to have confidence in the work of the Hela panel, then we need to be clearer exactly who is on it. So I would like to add in a recommendation, that requires further information on that to be brought back to this committee before that panel starts doing its work. And my second comment relates to the Devon County Council highways. And I am very concerned that there seems to be an issue with actually Devon County being able to do their work. And I know that one proposed solution is to provide feedback on the larger sites first. But I would have thought that that would be really difficult, bearing in mind how many sites there are and all the work that has to be done, and delays could push back the whole local plan process. So I'm wondering, apart from splitting the sites into bigger and smaller ones, whether there's any other way that we can get Devon County Council highways feedback more quickly. And I wondered whether Ed has any comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. We'll take a few more speakers. Councillor Marianne Rickson from outside of committee. Sorry, I didn't see your hand up. We'll go to you
thank
next.
you. Thank you very much. I've just got 2 queries. One is I think that we should do whatever we can to resist any change from employment land to housing, because I can perceive that that is going to be something that will come up in the future. And I note that under 4.2, it says amended guidance to clarify how to consider flood zones in stage A assessment where no data on functional floodplains exists. Well, of course, we're in the sad situation where our floodplain is being built on at Sid Ford, and they're currently about to widen the brook so that they can throw the floodwater further downstream, which is going to have consequences for local residents, but they will have no responsibility for it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rickson. We'll take one more speaker. Councillor Skinner, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? I'm struggling with this computer a little bit.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Mine is a declaration of interest. You did ask at because I actually have, I would imagine, but if we're not talking about specific sites, but I just think I ought to say it with FWS Carter and Sons, and no doubt they've probably got something in here, but I'm just drastically trying to look for something. And I've actually made a submission of on my own land, so I want to make that absolutely clear. If we're not actually talking sites and that, but I still think I ought to be just making my interests clear, so as everybody's clear about what that is. If we're not specifically talking about sites, we're talking about the process and that, then perhaps, but I just feel like I ought to have said that. Thank you very much. That was what I wanted to say.
Very much appreciated, Councillor Skinner. I've got a list of other people first. Okay. Councillor Jeff Pratt, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Ed, the word brownfield sites hasn't been mentioned, and I think that is something which we do need to consider when we're looking at this subject of sites. Can you confirm what steps you're taking in looking at brownfield sites in view of the problems with the COVID situation? There will be a lot of commercial sites which are going to become void or redundant, and these can be used for housing. And I would be glad to hear from you on that point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pratt. Ed Freeman, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I think the first point I've noted down was about the Hela panel and its makeup. I think it's important to bear in mind the role of the Hela panel, because it's fundamentally a group of key stakeholders looking to advise us on the achievability of sites. It's not about whether or not they're available or suitable. That is a matter still for obviously members to decide on. They're simply advising on what can be delivered and what's achievable in terms of those sites. And so it is made up of a number of key stakeholders, bodies like the Environment Agency, Natural England, but also representative of the housing industry, social landlords, property agents as well. So my point is really it's a factual exercise, really about tapping into expertise from key stakeholders. It's not about making decisions about which sites should or shouldn't be allocated. That is firmly for you as members to ultimately decide, taking on the advice of the panel and officers. In terms of Devon County Council highways and their resources, obviously that's an ongoing discussion with them, as it is in terms of resourcing of other consultees that will need to be engaged in this process. And obviously we have to understand that a lot of these consultees have limited resources that are overly stretched at the moment in particular. And so we have to be mindful that that may delay the process. I don't think there's much we can actually do about that other than work with them. I think the suggestion that's detailed in the report about asking them to look at the larger scale sites first makes a lot of sense, and will help us to move forward with those while they look at smaller scale sites. So I think we're doing all we can to negate that issue and minimise its impact on timetables, but obviously flagging that through this report that it could have an impact, it could delay the process, and that's something we will keep members advised of as we go forward, so that you're aware of any impacts it's having, and we can update you on progress in terms of timetable and evidence gathering. In terms of Councillor Pratt's comments about brownfield sites, obviously it's government policy that it should be brownfield first. We should be developing brownfield sites. And we've done a lot of work on understanding our brownfield sites. Obviously, the majority of them are in urban areas, and I brought to a previous meeting the urban capacity study work that we'd been doing, looking at sites that are available within the urban areas. And you'll recall that it was a relatively small contribution that was likely to make to delivering to the housing needs of the district. But those sites are all obviously in the mix and to be considered as we move forward with the planned production. And obviously sites that do come forward that are brownfield, obviously have benefits, and we would want to look to bring those forward if possible. So that needs to feed into this process, and is one of the things the Hela panel needs to look at in terms of their achievability, because while brownfield sites are obviously desirable in terms of making use of previously developed land, and that's something we should clearly be doing, they have their own constraints, potentially in terms of contamination, existing buildings that might need to be demolished, and these kinds of issues that can add to the costs of developing them. So that is all issues that need to be fed in and looked at through the experts on the Hela panel to advise us as to whether or not those sites are achievable. But I certainly agree with the principle of bringing forward brownfield sites first, and we should be trying to prioritise those through this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Rylance, you should speak next.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose before we vote on this, I'd really like to be quite clear in my own mind that with the powers granted to this Hela, we're not jumping from the frying pan of developer-led building into the fire of landowner-led building. I think as a strategic planning authority, we need to be looking, taking an overview of where we build and what we build, rather than allowing external forces to dictate those things. So I just want to be absolutely certain that we aren't ending up in a similar situation, but different, that from the one we were in before, which is that we had very little control over what was built and really essentially where. So if Ed could answer that question for me, that would be brilliant. Thank you.
Pretty much do it for Ed. We get the final decision. It's us as a committee get the final decision on it, not landowners, not developers. It'd be up to us. It is just the Hela process, and it's what's been done countless times before by many different authorities up and down the country. It's standard process, and this is what happens. But Ed, do you have anything you wish to add to that?
I think you said it all, Chairman. I mean, essentially, the what and the where is for the council. The panel is simply advising us on what is achievable in terms of each site to help to inform those decisions about what and where.
Chair, can I please ask Ed to answer my question, which he didn't? This is Councillor Marianne Rickson, about amended guidance on flood zones.
No problem at all. Ed, can you just get an answer for that quickly? I'll take Councillor Allen next, and we'll come back to you in a second. Councillor Allen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. In respect of the recommendations on page 122, the recommendations are actually in paragraph 6.2 on page 132, which is somewhat confusing, but never mind. But the one word I really don't appreciate is with regard to the highly skilled technology sector to be focused in the West End. I think everybody agrees that there should be an encouragement, but to focus it exclusively is a real problem for me, because high technology comes often with high income wage
Councillor Allen, can I just stop you there just for 2 seconds? You've jumped ahead of an agenda item. So I don't know if you want to hold these thoughts for the next agenda item, but we're currently still on the Hela process. So it's only 110 to 121.
Well, obviously, I missed that point, and I do apologise, Chair.
I'll happily bring you in at the next agenda item to take, but if you have anything else you wish to add on the Hela process, we're happy to take that now.
No, I'm very happy with the Hela process as proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Paul Arnott, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your reassurances earlier after the questions raised by Councillor Rylance and Councillor Bailey. I have to say I am very much got both feet in Councillor Bailey and Councillor Rylance's camp here, I think. You see, how Ed explained this to you, Chair, not Chairman, Ed, was that what would come forward from Hela was recommendations from the panel and from officers and we have been here before, and we do as a council and as members sometimes encounter great criticism for, I mean, I can quite imagine some of us in this room, you know, fast forward a couple of months, you know, if there are people who are vehemently opposed to what's coming from that Hela process, I think it'd be quite wrong for them to be criticised if they're pretty vehement in what they have to say. I mean, I take what you're saying, Chair, but and this may well be how it happens elsewhere. But just looking at the membership of the panel, so it's the builders, large and small, social landlords, estate agents, I don't know, other related professions. What's that? Conveyancing solicitors? I don't know. Community representatives. I'm not sure who they are, and other agencies. And if what Councillor Bailey is suggesting from her comment earlier is that we add to this, that we perhaps ask for some more detail on Hela than this, that would make me feel much more content. But I am worried about it at the moment, to be frank with you. It's, you know, it is, isn't it? Let's be honest, a bit like putting the fox in charge of the hen house here. And we do need to be realistic. And a lot of us were elected to try and make sure that we didn't, as Councillor Rylance is saying, basically jump from the frying pan to the fire and just repeat what's gone before. But I do take what you said, Chair, that this is how it's done. I'm just wondering if we can clarify and finesse it a bit ourselves.
I think it's just the case of taking expert opinion. So I don't think any member sat here is a major developer that knows what can be done with certain land across the district and whether even sites are viable. So I think we should look to expert opinion across the district, respect that opinion, and then that inform our decisions. And that's the disconnect that we need to make, is they are making no decisions. They're advising on what their expert opinion is on the sites that have been put forward, and then it is down to the council itself to then make the allocations itself. It's
Can I ask clarification, Chair, from you and it, one very simple question. Are they shortlisting? That's the question. Thank you.
Ed, I'll leave that to you.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is no, they're not shortlisting. They're simply providing advice on the achievability of sites. Fundamentally, our plan will not be found sound if we have not taken advice from appropriate sources and expertise throughout this process to inform the decision making. But ultimately, the decisions are entirely yours as members.
Councillor Bailey, over to you.
Yes, I'm sorry to say that I'm not really reassured by the answers that I've been given, and I don't think that councils generally take advice from experts when they don't actually know who those experts are. So to me, it's quite clear that there needs to be greater openness and transparency, at least on the makeup of that panel, and I don't understand why that's a difficult thing to achieve. I would never take advice from somebody that I didn't even know who they were, so I'm not sure that why we would do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Skinner, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and I'm pleased to come in behind Councillor Bailey, because I vehemently oppose what she has just said. In fact, actually, I could. When you've been here long enough, you tend to think the things you've done. I can remember when we had a SHLA process, which was the very start of this process, which was prior to the Hela process, which the Hela process brought in employment land and the SHLA didn't. And there was these professional people sat around a table, and there was a call, I believe, from Councillor Allen that at that time, many years ago, and I wonder if he may remember that actually we had a councillor representation, and I was asked if I would sit on that panel, and I found the people sat around that table on that panel, actually at that time looking at sites, really interesting people, and the knowledge that came from their expertise and what they had. And what they did is they put forward the advice of what was deliverable and not deliverable at that time. And the knowledge gain that I gained as a councillor listening to those professional people was actually very good and something that has stayed with me for many years in the way that developers look at things in developing out. In this particular process, and to be honest, Mr. Chair, I won't go on too long because I think you've actually eloquently put forward the views as to why we're going through this process in the first place. And there seems to be always a fear within councillors that as soon as you start use the word developer, you use the word anybody that's not actually councillor, that in some fact and in some way that becomes the enemy of the council. I think what we have to understand is what we're looking for, and certainly what I'm looking for, is a balanced view. And what I want to hear is from all sorts of people from the industry that are going to be developers, of their viewpoints, of the expertise which they have, to be able to gain the knowledge to understand the informative decision making that we're going to make. And I think that's just a balanced view that I'm very much up to. I very much want to hear from professional people, these people that come from companies from whatever they are, or from wherever they are, in communities from wherever they are. I take that as face value, and I would very much respect the positions that they sit in. So on that basis, I'm very comfortable in the way that we've done things in the past, and I'm very comfortable in the way that we're going forward. And I have got nothing that changes in my mind that I won't be supporting the way in which we're going forward in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ed, could you just cover off Councillor Rickson's question that wasn't covered off earlier, and then just any other comments that you have at this time?
Thank you, Chair. If I recall, I think Councillor Rickson's concern was about how flooding is taken into account through this process, and I can assure her that that flooding as a constraint is obviously considered throughout this process in terms of which sites are going to come forward for development. And government guidance is very clear that we shouldn't be allocating development, certainly not housing development, on land that is liable to flood. And clearly we should be avoiding it with employment uses wherever possible as well. So that is all part of the work that's ongoing to try and ensure we recommend appropriate sites for allocation to members, and we'll make members fully aware of any flooding constraints of sites. In terms of this issue,
the actual words was amended guidance. I just wanted to know what the amended guidance was. That's what I'm seeking a clarification on, please.
Well, I haven't got the wording in front of me, but essentially we're just ensuring that we pay due regard to government guidance, which in terms of flooding and flood maps is obviously constantly evolving and being progressed. That's all. In terms of the Hela panel, there was a constitution in terms of reference for the Hela panel, which is actually was formed for the 2017 Hela, which is published on the former guest website if members wish to look at that, which might help to provide some reassurance that there is public transparency about the panel, its constitution in terms of reference, and obviously we'll be following through with those principles with our own panel. So there's nothing this is all a transparent process, but obviously the makeup of the panel itself in terms of the individuals will depend on who's available at the time when we're looking to constitute the panel and set up those meetings. So it's difficult to tell you exactly who, but it will be a range of expertise, including local representation, which would usually be a council member, to ensure that the panel is fully equipped to advise members on the relevant issues. Thank you.
Chairman, since I've been named, do you mind if I comment on this particular issue?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Allen.
Yeah, it was always my concern that the council was involved through its members in the Hela or SHLA as it was. That was my concern then, and it's my concern now. And I don't like the comment by Mr. Freeman that maybe a council member would be involved. I think we need to be very clear that in this Hela panel, there is a tremendous amount of expertise to be transmitted. And really, we should aim to make sure that members are involved in receiving that expertise, just as Councillor Skinner mentioned. And I would like to ask for specific guidance with regard to the constitution of the Hela panel, so that we can make sure that a properly balanced membership from this council is involved in hearing this expertise and being part of it. So I really would like some clear definition of how members can sit, or which members will sit on this panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Councillor Bailey, you wish to come back?
Yes, I don't disagree that we seek expertise. Thank you, Councillor Skinner, but I think we need greater transparency. And if work has been done in 2017 and there were terms of reference and there's some confusion over what exactly local members' role are, I think that we need more work done on it before that panel meets to give confidence in it. It's highly controversial, the output, and we need to have greater clarity on it. So I'd like to add a formal proposal that further clarification is brought back to this committee around the makeup of the Hela panel, including Councillor Allen's point, the role of local members in that process. Thank you.
And
I'll second that then, Chair.
I will second it.
Councillor Skinner seconded it, but he was on mute. So that's been proposed and seconded. I know that we have 3 other people, but we are getting really pushed for time. Are we happy just to move? Yeah, we'll just move on and take it to a vote, please, if possible. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So we have 4 motions on this item. That firstly, the Strategic Planning Committee note the detail of the report, that Strategic Planning Committee agree the next steps agree the proposed amendments and the next steps to the Hela methodology detailed in sections 3 and 4 of the report, that delegated authority is granted to the Service League Planning Strategy and Development Management in consultation with the portfolio holder for strategic planning to make any further minor changes that might arise from a review of the methodology by the panel. And the additional element is that further information on the composition of the Hela panel is brought back to the committee before the Hela panel's first meeting to be set out, including the role of local membership on the panel. Those members, those of you in the chamber, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
Point of order, Chair. I think that the 4th recommendation, as proposed by Councillor Bailey and seconded by Councillor Skinner, specifically mentioned the role of councillors needs to be clarified, not just local representatives. And I want to make sure that we're crystal clear.
Sorry, so it's not the role of local members on the panel, but councillors in general. Is that correct, Councillor Bailey?
You're muted.
I'm afraid you're still muted, Councillor Bailey.
Sorry. I think Mrs. Shaw said local members. Is that not okay, Councillor Allen?
I heard local representatives. If it was local members, I'm absolutely happy. If it's local representatives, that could mean anything.
Well, I wrote down local members, but
I'll repeat what I thought I said. I do apologise if I'd said local representatives. The 4th one is that further information on the composition of the Hela panel is brought back to the committee before its first meeting to include the role of local members on the panel. Therefore, members, please Press your green tick if you're in support, press your red cross if you're against, and raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
Okay, the vote is currently underway. Okay, Chair, we have 10 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions, so that is carried.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw, and thank you very much, Wendy. I think at this point, we'll just take a short comfort break for members in the room. If we could reconvene at around 10 to. And yes, if we could just put the slides up. Thank you very much.
Yep, bear with me, I'll do that.
Wendy, are we ready to go again?
Ready, Chair.
Thank you very much. So just like to welcome everyone back to the meeting. We'll move on to agenda item 10, which is the approach to employment provision, and Ed Freeman to present a report. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously a lot of discussion about the new local plan is centred on housing and how we deliver housing numbers, but clearly delivery of employment space is a very key consideration alongside that as well. The local plan will have a crucial role to play in delivering high levels of quality economic growth for East Devon over the next 20 years. And one of its strategic objectives is clearly supporting business investment and job creation opportunities within East Devon and supporting a resilient economy. And this objective needs to sit at the heart of the plan. So this report sets out a number of the matters to be taken into account when members consider the strategic approach to the provision of employment land in the local plan and the evidence that exists to inform that decision-making process. So the report goes on to set out the existing position in terms of employment in the district. So currently East Devon has around 78,500 residents of working age, which is the third lowest proportion of working age people of any local authority in the UK. There are, however, around 64,000 jobs in East Devon, which leads to a ratio of total jobs to working age people across the district of 0.82. But this ratio is rising, even though it remains the average in the southwest is 0.88, so we're just below that, and just below the Great Britain average as well. Jobs in the service industry predominate in the district. However, the proportion of East Devon residents with higher level qualifications is steadily rising and has actually gone up from about a third in 2011 to nearly 50% in 2015. So that's a really positive picture there. A significant proportion of East Devon residents, however, travel outside the district to work. So we have about 41% of the working population commuting elsewhere, and by far the most popular location to commute to is Exeter, for understandable reasons. There's been various discussions with regard to principles for future growth. Members may recall a report in September 2018 to SVC that looked at growth objectives and principles for growth. Many of them still remain relevant today. So principles for growth discussed in that report included accommodating growth in locations that will not prejudice the future growth and operation of Exeter Airport. Ensure adequate employment space is provided to meet the needs of all types of business in sustainable and accessible locations. Promote new and emerging high technology industries, such as data analytics and environmental futures, and encourage greater connectivity across the district, ensuring high quality broadband infrastructure is incorporated into new developments and existing infrastructure is improved. Members may have some thoughts about the relevance of those principles today. Members will no doubt be familiar with the adopted local plan and the approach that that's taken to these issues. It presented a number of key objectives in the plan about improving average income levels, diversifying the sectors within the local economy, improving local job opportunities, and reducing the need to travel by car to secure work and jobs. It focused a lot of growth in the west end of the district, what's now more commonly referred to as the enterprise zone. And in the rest of East Devon, employment provision was mainly geared around serving local needs and securing jobs close to existing homes so that people had the option of not needing to commute long distances to work. In terms of achieving that objective, we're looking at gathering some more information on this, but it does appear that housing growth and employment growth have not happened entirely in sync, and employment growth is lagging behind housing growth. To some extent that's expected because while the housing numbers tend to be quite consistent year for year, you recall from the housing monitoring reports that we tend to deliver somewhere between sort of 950 and 1,000 homes a year quite consistently, whereas the jobs growth is perhaps less consistent with large employment areas like, for example, Science Park and Sky Park coming through in phases. So a phase might be delivered one year that delivers hundreds of new jobs, whereas the following year there may not be a phase coming forward on those key sites. Or something like the Lidl distribution depot comes forward in a year and creates hundreds of new jobs, and that obviously doesn't happen every year. But we need to understand that relationship a bit better and gather some more information on that to inform plan production of the new local plan. National guidance is clear that building a strong, responsive and competitive economy and providing sufficient land to do that is a key target and key aim for the new local plan. There's a number of existing evidence sources that exist. However, we are mindful that they were primarily produced in relation to GESP and predates the pandemic and Brexit as well. So those will need to be updated in due course. Obviously, finding a good time to do that is part of the challenges in terms of when the economy settles down into a more consistent pattern to be able to actually understand what the future looks like a bit better. I think we envisage hopefully being able to do an update of the economic development needs assessment, at least starting at the end of this year, in the hope that things will have settled down to be a bit more consistent by then. In the meantime, the assessment I think is still useful in demonstrating issues like what average wage levels are in the district, and much of the character of the district in terms of the different relationships between the different market towns and potential different policy responses that might be needed, as well as the strategic investment we've seen within the growth point area. It also flags up the needs of micro businesses in the district, those employing up to 9 employees. We have the highest number of those businesses in the Greater Exeter area, but it's still lower than the national average. And there's a recognised shortage of accommodation for those sorts of business. So that's a key issue clearly moving forward. We also have the employment land study that was undertaken on a broader geography, which covers the majority of Devon and Somerset, but also provides some interesting key findings in relation to information that's out there about the availability of sites, issues around protectionist policies to protect existing employment spaces. And I know that's a common issue that comes through the development management process in terms of applications coming forward that seek to change the use of existing employment spaces for housing purposes, which has its pros and cons in terms of potentially making use of brownfield sites, but also the loss of employment spaces within the towns that can stem from that as well. Other issues that arise from that are issues around the willingness of landowners to bring sites forward, the infrastructure costs of doing so, and the viability of sites, which also stems into our review of the existing local plan. We have a number of allocations, employment allocations within the plan that have not come forward and been delivered. And so as part of the new local plan, we need to look at those sites, understand the reasons why they've not come forward, what actions might need to be taken to bring them forward, and indeed whether or not carrying forward those allocations into the next local plan is appropriate based on that assessment. The report also summarises the responses we received through the issues and options consultation on the relevant questions. I won't delve into those in too much detail, having covered feedback on the issues and options consultation previously, but there's some useful issues arising from that members will no doubt want to have regard to. In terms of conclusions then, paragraph 6.26 to highlight some key concepts and issues that members may want to discuss and advise officers on. As I've said, the adopted local plan promoted a strategy of providing jobs alongside housing growth. We need to look at how successful that's been, but there's an issue there as to whether members remain wedded to that approach and wish to continue to pursue that approach, and if there are any thoughts on how we can ensure that that's successful in the future. that's also links to delivering jobs and homes alongside each other and in close proximity in the future to increase opportunities for residents to work near to or where they live. I think this is an issue coming through the emerging council plan as well about self-containment of settlements. And so perhaps that's a key issue members may want to take forward through the new local plan. Skill levels is another key issue, and the question of the highly skilled technology sector that's emerging within the enterprise zone area, what needs to be done moving forward to support that and ensure that that continues into the future, and looking at whether or not there's a need for additional land to be allocated in that area to continue the trajectory of growth there. As I've said, there's a particular need for small and medium business units in the towns, and perhaps a lesser scale in villages. So looking at how that's accommodated into a strategy, village development more generally, and this one job, one home approach, and how that's taken forward, if indeed members wish to take that forward. The protectionist policies issue and protecting existing employment land is also going to be a key issue for the plan moving forward. As will ensuring that sites are viable and deliverable, and trying to ensure that we don't end up in a situation where we have sites that are not delivering or cannot be delivered in a reasonable timescale and in a way that's viable. And linked to that, I suppose, just finally, is sort of the role of the council in terms of delivering those sites, and whether the council wishes to take a more proactive approach in terms of the delivery of employment spaces, particularly where the need that's arising is for smaller units for small and micro businesses. That is an area where the private sector has predominantly not delivered employment spaces, because it's generally not considered profitable to do so, in terms of issues around security of tenure, the cost of building those spaces relative to the return on that investment that's achieved. So there are issues about how we would deliver a strategy that's focused on meeting that need. And finally, the other issue is around home working. Obviously, that's been a key trend of the last year, and seems set to continue. So how do we support that and enable that to happen, and what happens to demand for office accommodation in the area, and any vacant spaces, how are those reused? So hopefully that's a useful fly through of sort of the key issues in relation to employment land for the new local plan, and hopefully some issues there at the end in paragraph 6.2 for members to discuss, and guide us as officers as to the direction that they would see this element of the plan taking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. We'll start outside of committee, and first up, Councillor Bruce Desaro.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I think this is a very positive report, and I think that if we look at the basis that 41% commute elsewhere to work, clearly, as it says in para 6.2, jobs and homes should be provided in close proximity. So I think one of the strategic problems we're going to face is how is broadband properly connected, so that everyone has access to broadband. And I think, Ed, you said that higher level qualifications have got 50%. So therefore, we've got a population which is obviously rising in technical competence. So I think that clearly, if we want to have jobs and homes close proximity, we've got to make sure that the broadband is correct. And at the same time, the other side is where you have employment sites, as we've had in Exmouth, where we had an employment site next to Tesco's as earmarked for employment, but the employment people didn't wish to come forward. So instead, we got a developer coming forward with a proposal which obviously wasn't acceptable to local people in Exmouth. So I think that's something strategically we've got to look at. What happens to the sites that we allocate if we don't get people coming forward, and are we able to have proper broadband so that basically we can connect and we can encourage more people to work from home, because clearly that will then free up sites where there won't be any need for offices. So those are my basic thoughts on this matter, Chair, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bruce. We'll take the next speaker, which is Councillor Peter Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. I had a conversation some time ago with a certain councillor who will remain nameless, but I'm sure she's not actually present. Shall we work out who it is? Complaining that the journey to work from the Newton Poppleford area to Exeter University could take up to an hour and 40 minutes. And I mean, it kind of follows on from Councillor Disarum's comments. There's a real need to have people working from home because one of the biggest climate change issues is transport. And if I can cycle faster along the Sidmouth roads and some of the cars that are going along that road, and I've just got a Mickey Mouse folding bicycle, it says a lot about traffic issues of all the cars trying to get into Exeter all the time, and the carbon emissions and all that sort of guff. So could we please work to reduce that traffic congestion and get employment right across the district rather than pushing everything in and around Exeter all the time? I think the less transport we have running around, everyone going from A to B all the time, and get people working from home, which I think the broadband issue is very relevant. I think it will make a big difference to our climate change issues. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Faithful. I don't see anyone from outside committee looking to speak, so we'll move to inside committee. Councillor Ingham, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to say I would want to propose the recommendations that we have before us. I just want to discuss some of that. I applaud the presentation made by Mr. Freeman. I think Mr. Freeman believes in, the sustainability of his local plan. So he realizes that without this, you can't have all the houses, or if you've got that target for houses, you've got to support it with robust employment opportunities. I'd like to turn that the other way round. I'd say, unless you get this right, you shouldn't be building more houses. We have to make every town in this district as sustainable as possible by creating those local jobs, as has been mentioned. And we have to raise our game by saying, let's create better quality jobs, enhanced opportunities for the future, not just for today, because we think about what jobs we might want to do now in the next 5 years, but what about in the next 25, 30 years? What kind of a place will East Devon be to live? I think it's desperately important that we get this right. I really like what's referred to in recommendation number 3, paragraph 6.2. Do have a look at that. But to sum up, what I would say, one of the most important parts of this report, please look at page 122, reason for recommendation. It's so clear. We must plan effectively for sustainable, high quality employment and be able to demonstrate that our proposed strategy is appropriate and will meet the local plan objectives and the needs of the district up to 2040. That's so important that we get this right to support everything else. It's very exciting, Chair, that we have these opportunities at Sky Park, at the Science Park, at the airport, and the relationship of our local communities with that, and possibly new communities that will grow, and the linkage with the University of Exeter. That's critical, that we are better than the rest, and we tempt people to come to live in East Devon when they're 18, because they want to go to university here. They want to then stay here and work here. not attract them when they've actually stopped working and they've decided to come and live in East Devon, and nothing must change from the day they buy their house in East Devon. That's got to stop. And that's why it was quite right what Councillor Allen was saying earlier, is that we do have to recognise the needs of future generations so that we don't have this ever increasing misbalance of demographic where people are just getting older and older in East Devon and providing and creating less and less. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Inman. I could not agree more. We need self-sustaining towns across East Devon that deliver for the people of East Devon. I think one opportunity that we haven't really talked about much is live work units, and the actual need for those across the district moving forward to actually allow people to work from home or have small workshop units at their home. There's an abundance of need for it, and we just do not cater for that at all over the district. There's also gaps, I think, especially in the east of the district, for skills provision and training. I think we're missing a trick really with the likes of, well, you have Axminster, which Councillor Hayward touched on earlier, has the draw of South Somerset, of West Dorset, but it does have issues of young children coming out of school, not being able to get to, if they're looking for a blue collar job and to get into an actual trade, you need to get 2 buses to get into Southend. It's so hard to get into. So I think this is more, it's more than just what employment provisions we're doing. It's how are we actually looking to train this next generation, and what are we doing to cater for the people? And there are things that I think we as a committee need to think about. Councillor Allen, I know that you will be leaving soon, so I'll just bring you in.
Thank you very much, Chair. You're really very kind. The whole thrust of my involvement with economic development over the years has been to make sure that the income level, the average wage, rises. And the issue for us in East Devon is clearly, how do we do this? Now, South Somerset, where I used to work, has done it admirably by particularly focusing in market towns and developing employment sites in Chard, in Yeovil, in Wincanton, and so on. And so the thrust that we had towards the West End development was a very much a cluster focus in East Devon. And it has great merit to build a science and technology cluster focus around an airport. However, it should not exclude strong development of appropriate premises and appropriate jobs in all of our market towns, and especially in the coastal and rural areas. Because unless we do that, we're condemning people to have to leave East Devon, and we're encouraging a disproportionate number of retirees, so that the only jobs left are either in hospitality and tourism or in care. And those jobs just simply don't pay enough. So the only thing I would like to alter on the recommendations are that the West End should be an area that should be encouraged, and not just an area that should be focused on. If we put too much focus into one spot, it will not benefit everywhere else. And what's more, it will lead to a higher level of commuting and a worse level of carbon. So I think that we need to really think through very carefully our town and coastal policies. And if we don't do that, and there's very much to do with economic development, then this plan will inevitably lead to an aging population and a worsening economic situation. I'm very grateful that you let me in. Thank you very much.
No problem at all, Councillor Allen. I think there would be a question that I've just put to all committee members, and it's something that I think we need to think about now, is that what do we do in towns which are highly constrained already? How do we inject these employment opportunities into towns which, what we've seen in earlier reports, can't take much more housing and can't take much more employment? How do we work around creating sustainable, self-sustaining communities that we're aspiring to have? It's just an open question for the committee. We'll move to
Thank you, Chair. And might I say, there is in understanding this subject, and it's a subject of the economic development that's been very close to my heart for many, many years. And it's understanding the difference as well between housing development, which is driven by areas of land and already existing housing premises, and business development, which actually takes on a totally different way of setting itself up by, in very often, small places evolving from somewhere small and growing slightly within an environment in which they already live and survive, and then focusing on where we're going to go, where we go into the future in growth of businesses that grow within small sites and then to other sites and get that natural growth. And that's really good. So points that Councillor Allen makes are very, very good points. And the issues that we have, and you touched on it earlier, Chair, is by sitting on the planning committee that I do, that so many times I've been challenging against small developments where even housing or employment are, and we only had one last week of employment where we actually got it over the line. And got it over the line predominantly because there was a change in government policy from August 1st of whereby brownfield sites are going to be, and barn conversions in the countryside and the rural areas override our D8 policy, which was a point of refusal. And it made absolute nonsense. I actually think the planning committee may have been fair and we may have got it over the line because there was other reasons that was only one reason we didn't get over it. But that is your live work type units, which only made common sense, and that common sense approach. And that needs to, sometimes you sit there, we have our policies that we put in place many years ago, and we are at fault as the councillors, not our officers. Us councillors within this actual setup of the planning, strategic planning process, where we have with us the ability to drive that policy agenda to get over the line the wishes of what many of us want to see. It's our fault. It's nobody else's fault. And I always took that very much on board when I was very much the economy portfolio holder. When we talk about focusing where we're going to go, and the point that Councillor Allen was making in just having the concentration of the West End, he's quite right and accurate that we did not just concentrate on the West End, but actually have the ability to have places at the other end of the district, like Axminster. And for instance, there's things happening in Axminster. And if somebody was to drive the way through in wanting a high-tech business, would we stand in the way of that? And I would say we wouldn't. Would we encourage it? I think we would. And if a company there wanted to grow, would we want to see that growing? So we need to be flexible when it comes to employment land. Really important that, to be flexible, because business moves fast. But there's one thing we can't change. It doesn't matter who we are or what we are or how we're going to sit around this table and decide where businesses are going to go. Businesses will go where they want to go. And if you don't provide that provision in East Devon, they'll just go somewhere else. So when we have the vast amount of businesses looking at both for an example, the Hill Barton and Greendale Barton sites, and I declare my interest in the Greendale Barton site. I've done this before, but these things need to be said. We could give them both 20 acres more land tomorrow, and by the end of the year, they could have them full. That's not because necessarily they are particularly good at what they do in getting those sites, but because businesses want to go near the motorway network, near the network whereby both there's a plethora of people to work in those businesses from a city centre advantage, with East Devon having 140,000 people around it, because when you set a business up, you also have to have the employees to work with it. When you start looking at how that growth is going to grow and grow forward, I will just move slightly on to when we talk about strategic planning and the things that aren't within this report. I was very much in favour of, and maybe some of you may have heard whispers or spoken to or listened to, I was very much in favour of taking a holistic approach to strategic planning at East Devon that actually encompassed its sport and sport agenda. And the reason I was wanting to do that was sport and education combined together, both with Exeter University's outreach and wanting to outreach outside of the university campus and Exeter College in wanting to grow as well, was very important as to how we set our strategic planning up in going forward. We've also got a college in our grip at Bicton College, which is actually Bicton College is under threat from the growing agenda of what they might see in which they're going forward and what they want to do. There is a discussion to be had, Chair, through you and through this committee and through this council, a discussion to be had regarding the real issue that when you pull back from housing, employment, land, and all this stuff, you actually get back to educating our children for tomorrow. And how we're going to have the children for tomorrow that are going to come, and we create that place and space environment for which them to work in. And all of this must engage itself in the same process with Exeter Hospital, the RD&E that is looking for growth in what it wanted to do. And this was happening when I was the board member director for the Science Park and all these other things. All these conversations were taking place, and it all seems to be lost within this. It was all within the guest process as to how we're going forward, but it seems to have been lost in here. I see nothing in here, and I stand to be corrected, because each time we've had a meeting, I've missed the last 2 or 3 simply because something else came up, and I'm really disappointed that, because these meetings are really important. If that is there a place for that and I've missed it, I do apologise. Because I haven't seen it, I assume it's not there. So any real substantial growth regarding sport, health, well-being, education, and that whole agenda is missing from this. And if we're missing that from this, the points that Councillor Ingham made, absolutely bang on. If we don't get this bit right, you actually need to deliver everything else first in your structure plan and in the process of your strategic planning, and the housing actually comes last. And what we always do, and we do every time, and I just so much wanted a change. The housing should come last. We should start with the infrastructure, the education, the things that we need, and produce the employment land, and then say, and they will fit the housing in. But we don't do that. We fill all the land up with the housing, and then we say, where can we put this? Oh, where can we put that? And why? Because the currency, the money driver, is the housing, because that's where they can go. You can buy a piece of land, you know how many acres it is, you know how many houses you'll get on it, you'll know what your profit margin would be, bang, it carries on. That's how it happens. Employment land, much harder. Space for education, space for sport, much more difficult to drive. And the reason why this fails, and I've said it for many, many times, and I just so much wanted to change this agenda, was because we talk about the spaces where we want to be. We then get up against it, and we've had it many times where land developers take option agreements with landowners. They then get the landowners, whether it be farmers or landowners, whatever they are, their heads full of God knows how much an acre for the land of what they're going to get. And then all of a sudden we're stuck in this place. And I'll give you a prime example of where this has happened. If we want to look at Sky Park, I think we've been trying to I think we've been trying to get Sky Park built and developed for many, many years. Just answer me one simple question. Why is it both Hill Barton and Greendale Barton are screaming out for more land and haven't got enough, and Sky Park sits up the road in actually a very good location, one might say, and for some unknown reason, it just doesn't get delivered out, very, very slowly? Why is that? Where's the drivers? Because the businesses are the same. And in actual fact, I could even describe something even worse than that they have an advantage of both the other 2 sites of which I'm trying to understand, is that they've got an enterprise zone. And within that enterprise zone, they would deliver within that enterprise zone your rates for nothing for a 5-year gap. to get these businesses up and going, and still it's not taken up. What is it we've got fundamentally wrong? Because there's something wrong in what we're doing. You can't say it's not location. The location of Sky Park is excellent with the road network as to where it is. And yet you tell me you could go there, there's acres and acres and acres of land not taken up. We need to absolutely fundamentally understand that within this particular document that we got here, we need that open space, we need sport provision, we need healthcare, big time, because the hospitals need big time. We need to be getting this into our local plan process, find somewhere for it to go and get it included. Because if we don't get it in now, you lose that opportunity and then the land goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Ed, do you have anything you wish to add here? I know that you're probably going to mention that we are bringing an NHS paper to the next strategic planning committee, aren't we?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, there's a paper on the next agenda about planning contributions towards healthcare services coming up. There are also, if we go back to the committee work programme that members agreed at their March meeting, I believe it was, there are topic papers scheduled for the September meeting on health considerations and sports and recreation considerations. So those are key issues that we need to bring papers to members on and ensure that they're brought into the mix alongside the more traditional, so say, issues of housing and employment, land provision. So we haven't lost sight of those. They are coming forward at future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bailey, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, so I think we need more emphasis, as Councillor Desarum mentioned earlier, on broadband, and I think it would be really interesting to understand what we can do through the planning process to facilitate broadband. It's in the report, but it's kind of at the end, and I think that we can't underestimate how important it is in terms of productivity for people, both in terms of working and also for just living, and how essential it is. And it is patchy really across the district. And the second thing I wanted to say was that I'm concerned about some of our current employment sites, industrial estates, and how we can, and this kind of goes back to Councillor Pratt's point that he made earlier this morning about how we can re-energize our existing sites where there are already buildings on them, rather than spreading more and more into the countryside, because that's obviously the easy thing to do, but there will be a massive change as a result of COVID. So I think that's an important consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. Councillor Rylance, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So we do have strategic employment sites in this district, which were delivered originally as part of a desire to raise average wage, as I understand, and also bring jobs to the growth points. Since then, another imperative has been overlaid over the top of that, and that's the environmental imperative. And it strikes me that through our strategic planning, we could in fact be altering the pattern of employment, and we could be allowing people, permitting people, enabling people to work from home, and actually make real inroads into tackling the environmental crisis. So we keep talking about the West End of East Devon as a development site. Now, first of all, it's a collection of villages. It's not the West End of East Devon. It's not a desert that had nothing in it before people started moving houses into there. But secondly, it is predicated on being part of the commuter zone for Exeter. And if the last year has shown us anything, it's that actually a lot of people don't need to work at their office anymore. If the COVID pandemic has had any good at all, it's shown the way in how we can work. Now, anybody who's listened to me over the last 4 years will have been banging on about broadband in rural areas as a strategic provision, and so been told very patronisingly at times that actually no, it was a bit of a luxury. Well, as the owner of 2 micro businesses in a rural area, I can assure you it's not a luxury. It makes the difference between being able to work from home and not being able to work from home. And so if we can't get that right, then we really need to work out why. In terms of your report, Ed, in a couple of places you mentioned not having enough evidence for things. I feel like we should be gathering that evidence. And I don't feel we should proceed on inadequate evidence. There was one thing I wanted to, so yes, there's lack of data mentioned in one place. And yes, some of the conclusions will now be outdated. Everything has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, and more specifically in the last 18 months. And I just feel like if we don't address those changes, then maybe we're not going to be making the right decisions. So what data do we need to gather to be sure that we're making the right decisions? And I can only echo the various people who've said that, the focus shouldn't necessarily be on the west end of East Devon. But also I'm glad that Councillor, I can't remember who, mentioned Hill Barton, because Hill Barton is not a good example of a place that's in a strategically well-located place. It's down in the 3052, which with lorries thundering up and down through villages is really not very well located. The M5, it is not close to the M5, and it goes through several villages. So, and rather depressingly, it seems as though we are quite happy to allow employment land on green fields, but not happy to allow all that much housing development on green fields. So essentially we're asking houses to be built on essentially poisoned land and allowing warehouses and haulage business to go into green fields. That seems a bit screwed up to me. Surely we should be doing it the other way around. But that's another. So actually I found myself in the slightly uneasy position of agreeing slightly with Councillor Skinner about putting the infrastructure down first. Coming from the French tradition, as I do, they do actually put the infrastructure in first and build the houses afterwards. What we've been doing for the last 15 years is not working for people. It's not working to deliver the things that people need. And in the last couple of years, everything has changed. So are we still sure we're doing the right thing? Are we actually adding the right things in the right places so that communities can become more self-sustaining and more self-contained? And specifically, are we allowing business owners and workers in rural areas to do what they need to do? Because unless we get all these, some of them are quite soft strategic deliveries, like the broadband, it should be possible to deliver that in a fairly straightforward manner. We just don't seem to be able to. So I really hope that the new rash of county councillors is going to be looking at that, because I feel like it's something that should come through county council and has been looked at through county council, but has fallen into abeyance at times. I sometimes feel like I'm the honourable member for the rural areas really in here. But yeah, so those are my witterings in no particular order. But yes, we do need more evidence, it seems. We need better broadband. We need better focus on how to enable people to work from home. And I agree with a range of people and some surprising people who've spoken today.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rylance. Now, going back what seems an eternity, Councillor Ingham did propose the amendment. Could I have a seconder for it? Yeah, we're going to go through all the people still. Councillor Allen did second it, but has since subsequently left. So Councillor Skinner is seconding that. Councillor Blakey, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. I won't try to repeat an awful lot of what's already been said, except to say that I very much concur with the points contained in 6.2, all the bullet points that are there. Can't see very much in there to disagree with. There's one point that I would really like to see emphasised, which is the last one on page 132, which relates to how East Devon District Council might be able to intervene and acquire additional sites to get those delivered and to enable development, what I think is really the essential, which is the small one-man micro business, the new starts, because those are the businesses that, some of them at least, will grow to become larger businesses, and they will provide the employment growth for the next generations, as alluded to by Councillor Skinner. It is those starts that I think we are desperately short of space for, and I think that we can play a role in actually developing those units where we know that in the commercial world they're not terribly attractive because, as has been said, the returns aren't necessarily that great. The returns that we could accept, I suspect, would be unacceptable in a normal commercial investor. And coming back to your point, Chair, about how do we promote employment growth in the established settlements where towns and villages are already well developed and built out, I think the answer is to be light on our feet when it comes to repurposing commercial buildings. We're seeing in town centres that the types of businesses that are thriving are changing. Retail businesses particularly, a lot of them are struggling because of a switch to the online trading, which comes as no surprise. And I think that we should be looking at encouraging landlords in larger businesses to think about how they can repurpose those buildings for the future. One of the things that strikes me as being obvious is to allow partitioning of businesses to create again more of those small spaces to get new and small businesses in and allow them to grow. I think that sticking with retail as being an absolute requirement for a town centre building isn't going to help anybody. We need to allow those buildings to be used for other things, and absolutely where necessary allow them to be converted for residential as well. But that's not the argument we're having here. So I think we need to be a bit more interventionist in how we approach industrial, commercial and retail and other business land in the district. Thanks.
Good, Chair. Just coming back on points that have been made. So Councillor Skinner was quite right. Businesses, unfortunately, move far faster than councils. There are probably businesses in East Devon which have been set up and established in shorter time than one of these meetings takes to run through. And so councils tend to respond in a way that's not compatible with business. For every private sector, I'll name them, Amazon business set up, councils are probably thinking of establishing a Laserdisc factory or a Betamax factory. By the time it's built, it's obsolete. Time has moved on. So we need to be fleet of foot. Councillor Skinner is quite right. We need to be fluid and flexible, but we need to be looking far in advance. And that you need to innovate. You need to take some risks. You need to have the experts and the resource and the evidence in front of you, but you need to move quicker. And unfortunately, that's just the basis of councils. Councils that have to convene a committee, a cabinet, a council, come back for more evidence, gather more reports. By the time you've done that, time's moved on. Businesses aren't shackled by those things. They have obviously a board. Smaller businesses just have the person making the decision, and they can do that. Unfortunately, the impact of COVID and the impact of the B word is going to have profound changes. And sadly, by the time those changes manifest themselves, we'll be behind the curve again. So we need to look at this from a different view, and this is where strategic planning will come to the fore. But we do need to be creative. We can't be constrained by the way we've done things before. In terms of large-scale housing developments, again, I find myself, I'm sorry, Councillor Skinner, but agreeing with Councillor Skinner that, large-scale housing developments are built quite often to make people wealthy, not for the good of communities. And certainly in Axminster, many, many years ago, I questioned a particular development, why it was being built, and asked where the jobs were going to come from in the Axminster area. And I was told by a former member of this authority that they will get on the train and go to Exeter. That was the solution. So effectively, Axminster was to become a dormitory town. And what you've seen before you here, in terms of the Hela projections and the Hela allocations that we are yet to consider and be evaluated, will do just that. It will make Axminster even more of a dormitory town, because the job creation cannot possibly match the number of houses that are proposed. Axminster could potentially grow by 100%. You're not going to create 100% more jobs in Axminster. Those people will be forced to commute by car, by rail, and it will be one way, as you've said, Chair. To get into Dorset, to get into South Somerset is a pipe dream for our younger people. And unless you have a car, you can forget about it. So everyone has got to come west, which then backs up the need to do what Councillor Allen was railing against. Effectively, you're forcing us to do certain things. In terms of I suppose the final point I want to make really is we question why Sky Park succeeds where others fail. And I suppose my parting comment with that, rather controversially, would be Sky Park seeks planning consent before they build the building. Thank you.
That's naughty. That's a no shot. I should have said that.
I'll try to follow that. So I think we need to look at the entire economy here. So we need to look at the realities of what our demographic is. So let's look at it positively, even though it's often regarded as a negative. We have a huge retired population that's reflected in all of these reports. We have an increasing tourist economy as well. Now, what that feeds is ultimately the need for jobs in care, as Councillor Allen pointed out, and jobs in tourism. And the difficulty with those is that the wages in those aren't necessarily high enough to sustain young people or older people staying in the area to discharge them. We have now seen that happen this summer, where Brain of Britain Tim Martin of Wetherspoons of Exeter has now discovered that he's short of employees because of the B word, and they can't come here from Europe. So he's asking for a change in the law so they can come here. Well, some of us saw that coming. But being serious about this, we must recognise that a lot of people, a lot of families depend upon the income that comes from care work and from tourism. And it may not be the kind of, from a council strategic point of view, the aspirational, heavy-hitting Sky Park, everybody's got their heads plugged into a wire somewhere. But it's proper, decent work that needs doing, and it does contribute to the economy. And I think we need to always remember that. It's a big chunk of our economy, particularly of the rural or semi-rural economy. Coming to your point, though, Chair, which I endorse so strongly, is that we must, the other benefit of having a large retired affluent community is that there is an infinite amount of work for people in the trades, just huge. Whether, to be honest, if I was a young man, I'd retrain as a plumber around here and probably, expect to retire to Spain at the age I am now. So there's no doubt that we haven't got enough structure, as Councillor Skinner was saying, to educate those skills in the places where they live. It is problematic that some schools are at Bicton and some are at Exeter College. There are others elsewhere, but we really do need to try and get it into Honiton or into Axminster as well. I think the other point that you were making, Chair, sorry, it sounds like I'm sucking up to you, is the idea of the live work units. This is really important. Now, these aren't just for people to sit there, with their boxer shorts on all day, doing kind of, internet-y jobs, designing websites. This is for people who want to live at home and are actually doing something that is tool-based as well. It can be practical. It can be a unit within their house where they can go and prepare something that they then go and deliver at somebody else's house, service or a trade or whatever. I think it's critical that we use this opportunity to try and sustain the smaller towns and villages as well. If two little units on the edge of one of those or on a brownfield site there that provide, as Councillor Blakey was saying, the opportunity for one-person bands just to get going has such a fantastic knock-on effect. The other sector that we must always be mindful of, and again, I agree with Councillor Blakey, we do know some towns where there are too many shops. It's as simple as that. And it would be quite hard to resist some of them becoming something else. On the other hand, there are other communities, and I can think of Axminster in particular, and others, Sidmouth, elsewhere, Honiton, where the local people are fighting really hard to retain those shops and to develop the economy within the town through an enhanced retail offer. And that's really exciting. And I think that's a sign of the times. I think people, of course, will always shop in supermarkets, of course, because they're irresistible, but they really do want to, and it's not just the kind of chattering classes, they really do want to buy items as much as they can from smaller local traders and retailers. So this is, I mean, the person I feel most sorry for today is Wendy taking the minutes, because how she's going to capture all of this, I have no idea, because each of us seems to be preaching for England, don't we? But I'll shut up now, Chair. That's my paper. Thank you very much.
Thanks, very much appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Next up, we'll go back outside of committee. I censored Councillor Ragg at the last agenda item, so I can't do it twice in the meeting. Councillor Ragg, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I didn't know whether you called me before my iPad overheated. It was while Councillor Skinner was speaking. Whether that affected my iPad, I don't know. But much of what I was going to say has been covered by Councillor Arnott. But one thing I would like to ask through you to Ed Freeman, Chair, is it's something I batted on about for many years, about the inward migration of elderly retired people and whether we could include something in our local plan which would limit the scale of this residential development aimed at that specific age group. All it does is it might provide 1 or 2 jobs in a sheltered housing place, but once they move on from there, and I once went to a McCarthy and Stone public inquiry, and the inspector or one of their barristers said, "Do you know how many homes there are? How many elderly retired people live on the Salterton Road in Exmouth?" And I said, "No, but I know how many live in your homes. There are 200 in that one, 180 in that one, and so on and so on." And I said, "What happens when they need a level of care?" "Oh, well, we ask the families in and we discuss it with them." And I said, "But some don't have families. What happens to them?" And the simple truth is that they have to leave their homes and go to somewhere which can care for them. So they, in fact, themselves suffer for it. It provides very low rate jobs, lowly paid jobs. I have a daughter who she's a senior carer now, so she's not so badly off, but even so, they're working 12-hour shifts, and it cannot be good, for people who are never going to get a property to own themselves because they don't earn enough. So it has serious economic consequences, I think, not just for East Devon, for the whole of the Southwest. And add to that, the second homes got a dearth of employment or very lowly paid employment. So I just like to ask through you, Chair, Ed Freeman, can we limit the number of these sheltered housing complexes, please?
We've only got a few more speakers, Councillor Ragg, so we'll get through them and then get to Ed Freeman. So next up, Councillor Davey, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be very brief. I support a lot of what other councillors have said about not focusing too much on the West End. I see that it is obviously an enterprise zone, and we do want to support what's happening there, but we also need to not take our eye off the ball and make sure that we're supporting employment right across the whole of our area. And that means support for small and medium enterprises, absolutely. and I echo what everybody says about broadband. But I want to go back to Councillor Faithful's point about public transport and cycle routes, and we absolutely should be supporting those and making sure that when we are looking at new developments, whether they're employment or housing, that we are considering how people are going to move around and make sure that there are alternatives to the car available to them. And particularly with the growth of electric bikes, I think that cycle routes are going to be absolutely essential. And if Councillor Faithful can go faster than the traffic on his ordinary bike, an electric bike is going to do that even faster. So we do need to really support the growth of cycle routes and off-road cycling right across the whole of our area. And something that nobody's mentioned, I'm going to bang the drum for arts and culture, because we need to remember that they have an important economic part to play as well. And we need to make sure that we're supporting them. I have 2 children who make a living out of being commercial artists. They can work at home quite happily, but they actually prefer to work in a studio with other artists where they can chat, they can share social time. So I'd like to see us bearing in mind that there is sometimes a need for that. And that all provides further employment, it provides income for whoever's renting the studio space. So let's not forget the arts sector when we are considering employment and how we support that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Councillor Pratt, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to consider the final paragraph in 6.2 on page 132. It has been mentioned before, but it does say that this council has a far higher publicly owned range of sites than other authorities. Now, we really ought to know how many sites we're talking about here. They could be used for employment, they could be used for housing, but could Ed advise exactly how many sites we're talking about and roughly how much land in area we're talking about as well? But this is important. The council can lead on these matters if they own a lot of land. I know Councillor Haywood and myself have been trying to get the details of sites owned by the council, but we've been having difficulty in getting that. But we should look at our own land and see whether or not we could develop. Perhaps Ed could give us the details.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pratt. We'll let Councillor Skinner have the final word before we go to Ed. Over to you, Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a point that was discussed earlier, and I believe Councillor Blakey was talking about these small, and I very much agree with much of what he was saying regarding the availability of them and how the private sector does not pick up on so many of them. That they are changing in that role, actually, Councillor Blakey, slightly, but certainly I think there's an input that we could play. And of course, with very small sites, small, they take a structure to put into place, but they're also quite difficult, can be quite hands-on to manage. There's a lot more management of them, and of course the risk is higher because the businesses are small and so there's high risk. So intervention, and Councillor Blakey spoke about intervention. And I'm interested in that because I think this is something we could expand on, because what he talked about and went on to say was perhaps we as a local authority could actually go forward and we could intervene in taking land. And I'm assuming, Councillor Blake, I'm not speaking at a time when you were trying to suggest that we could play more of a role of doing that. But there's a halfway house that I think is a debate to be worth open up to. And that is because of where the money situation is at the moment. There are lots of companies actually with lots of money that now have to pay to have their money in a bank and pay the bank to keep hold of their money. So they actually lose money by having money in the bank. Now, anybody in business, especially in the development world, will actually move into the world to say that if they could make an investment and the returns, and Councillor Blakey was absolutely right, the returns can be much smaller now because the ballpark has changed, Councillor Blakey, from our day to even just a couple of years ago to today. And I think there's a discussion to be had with said so-called developers in a way of finding out where we can go, where we could do a halfway house between how we as a local authority could see to trying to promote those small little businesses and going forward and how we do that, but actually the intervention from those businesses to actually put the funding in. And the risk is shared in that sort of approach. And I think there's an opportunity and a conversation to be had in that, because again, as I pointed out earlier, and I thank Councillor Hayward for supporting much of what I said, was that there is this intervention whereby I think there's middle ground to be had now, which wasn't there just 12, 15 months ago, 2 years ago. And absolutely, as Councillor Rylance has spoken about staying at home, it's not all about staying at home, actually. You can't actually all work from home. And I remember somebody coming for employment with myself when one of the reasons why she wanted to come out into an office environment, because she split up from her husband and she'd been at home working home for 2.5 years, and she was actually bouncing off the walls a bit and needed adult conversation because she had 2 young children. But there's a balance. So Councillor Rylance wasn't wrong, but there is that balance between very good broadband, people working from home, but that sort of hybrid, that halfway house about how we have, and I think we're all beginning to understand, we have to be fluid. We have to be able to evolve in circumstances around. And Councillor Hayward pointed out only earlier about how we are quite slow and cumbersome. So I think what we need to do is to think about a way of going forward. We've been always very stringent over the last, and it's not been the last 4 or 5 years, it's been the last 40 or 50 years, whereby planning becomes so the backstop for development in the future, but actually very much what it is also the protectionism in moving into the countryside and green space and all these things. And there's that balance to be had between the two. But what we need is, instead of something that actually pins us down to say, no, you can't do that because that's not the policy that we got, but in some ways it becomes flexible when we want it to be and not flexible when it's not. And that's a bigger conversation with central government as well. But if central government really wants us to respond to businesses today, they have to give us the flexibility through the planning process that in lots of ways is very good at protection, but in some ways is not always very good at being fluid and moving forward. So there's a bigger conversation to be had, which I think through this committee, through you, Chair, this is the committee that takes that sort of thinking forward as to how we talk to other members within even our MPs and say, how can we be flexible? And surely the government of the day in the position that we're in is not going to be saying no to things that we're trying to bring really good ideas and things forward in being flexible for businesses to work. And I think this is really key, actually. It's quite a light bulb moment in the fact that here we are doing a local plan in the same old way as we still always same old do it, when in actual fact we need a bit of enlightenment to have some changes that gives us that flexibility to be more flexible, a bit more fluid, a bit more light on our feet, to be able to respond to businesses when they're going to engage, invest and employ people, along with education as well, which we don't need that debate today because it's coming in the next one, which I will very much look forward to. I make those points because I think they're very relevant, Chair, and they're very important at this moment in time. Thank you. I hope Councillor Ragg's computer hasn't been again overheated.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Ed, can we just go to you just to cover off the questions that have been asked, and then we'll ask Mrs. Shaw to take us to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. So just go back through my notes. I think I started off with a note about broadband, and I think Councillor Bailey raised a point about how can we facilitate broadband. I think it's difficult because obviously it's not really a planning issue in terms of how and where broadband is delivered. We're very much in the hands of BT Openreach and government investment in infrastructure to facilitate better broadband. What we are doing, and it's mentioned in this report, is about a report about the hierarchy of settlements. And looking at what facilities and infrastructure is available in settlements as part of that. And historically, we've done settlement hierarchies based on factors like is there a shop available, what are the bus services, is there a primary school, and things like that. This time we've been looking at broadband speeds as well. So we got some good information on what broadband speeds are like in individual settlements, so that can inform the assessment of the settlement hierarchy, but also stemming from that where you might want to put growth in terms of ensuring that new developments are served by good broadband speeds, or potentially putting development in areas where by allowing growth in those areas, it can help to facilitate better broadband speeds, the benefits of not just that developments, but the settlement as a whole. So that certainly needs to factor into our considerations as we move forward with the local plan, and we've been gathering some evidence to help to support that as an issue. Talking of evidence, Councillor Rowlands raised the issue about evidence needed and what's highlighted in this report in terms of additional evidence. I think the main evidence we need is an update of the economic development needs assessments that's referred to in the report. One we got was done for GESB in about 2017, but as has been said, lots of things have changed over the last year, 18 months, particularly in terms of the economy. So that needs a refresh and needs looking at again. There was some discussion among officers about doing that earlier in the year, but there was concern while we were still in lockdown and so fresh after Brexit as to how informative a reassessment of that might be at that time. I think things are starting to calm down and get to a position of a more stable position. So I think it would be appropriate to commission a refresh of that work later this year to help to inform production of the draft plan. But that's really the key piece of evidence that I think is missing, and it's been an issue of timing in terms of commissioning that to ensure that it's productive and useful as a piece of evidence rather than just lots of economists saying, well, we don't know, which I think I fear is where it would have been had we commissioned it earlier. Other things that were raised, I've got Councillor Ragg's question about inward migration of retirees. I think it might be difficult to have a policy that specifically limited housing for care homes and retirees, because there is a need for them. It's perhaps to turn it on its head is perhaps having policies that ensure that we're delivering housing that meets the needs of the communities within East Devon. We've got the local housing needs assessment that was brought to members, I think tail end of last year, which gives quite a detailed breakdown of the housing needs of the communities within the district. And I think it's having policies that ensure that our housing provision meets those needs. And then by virtue of that, if we're meeting the needs of the local population within the housing need that's being delivered overall, then the needs of that the market might identify more than perhaps we do as a resident population will form a smaller part of the overall provision, which would perhaps help to address Councillor Ragg's concerns in that regard. But we have to remember there's an element of market forces in play here, and also an element of what is locally needed in terms of retirement accommodation. And if you look back at the local housing needs assessment, there is a clear need for further retirement accommodation in the district. The other point I've listed was Councillor Pratt's point about publicly owned land. I don't have stats in front of me of land areas and number of sites that are publicly owned. What I would say is, when we say publicly owned, we don't just mean owned by East Devon District Council. Obviously, Devon County Council owns Sky Park. Science Park Company is made up of public bodies. So there's lots of employment land within the district that's publicly owned, but our role is not a key stakeholder or not us ourselves at all. There are some sites where we are the landowner or part landowner, such as the Hayne Lane site in Honiton, where we own about a third of that site, I think, as a council, and there is work ongoing to master plan that site to help to unlock that and bring that forward, because it is one of the stalled employment sites in the current local plan. So clearly we need to work to do that, and certainly I think a number of members have made comments about the council perhaps needing to take a more proactive role in the delivery of small spaces for micro businesses, and my understanding of the market is very much that would be necessary if that's the direction of travel members wanted to go in terms of the economic strategy of delivering those types of spaces, because of the issues for the market in terms of the return that delivers, and security of tenure, because so many small businesses fail ultimately, and so as a landlord that's a risk that a lot of private sector landlords are unwilling to take, of providing those sorts of spaces and then having to manage a relatively high turnover of tenants. So that's something perhaps not for this committee, but perhaps the council needs to look at moving forward, that needs to then inform our strategy through the local plan. Hopefully I haven't missed any questions. I think that picks up on everything I'd noted. Thank you, Chair.
I think that does pretty much. We'll just go to Councillor Ingham just to sum up. We're eating into the lunch break now, so if we just keep it quite short.
I'll be direct, Chair.
Thank you.
Firstly, I see this as the most interesting item so far today, because it's the one we have potentially the most influence over if we choose to take it, and therefore that makes it the most important. There's a lot of ideas come forward this morning. How many of them are right? I think they're all right. They're all very relevant, and it displays our commitment to providing a secure future for the people of East Devon. I think we should stop being passive as a council. We should stop being reactive with regards to this subject. Councillor Skinner was quite rightly saying we've got to be fluid and flexible. And I think it was Councillor Blakey who was saying, what about some intervention? And I would say, yes, intervention for innovation, because the innovation gives us growth, prosperity and wealth and a credible future for decades. And that's something that's desperately exciting. So it's yes to the broadband, sustainable town centres, but for the main thing is, for me, this is just the first step in the right direction, Chairman. Let's move forward and start getting things right for this district with regards to supporting innovation, industry, growth, prosperity and wealth for our communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ingham. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to a vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, you have three elements to this motion. Firstly, that the Strategic Planning Committee note the detail of the report and consider the existing evidence that will form the broad strategic approach to employment provision in the new local plan. Secondly, that Strategic Planning Committee agree in principle to commissioning / collecting further evidence as needed to ensure there is sufficient robust evidence on employment need and supply to justify strategic policy on employment requirement provision to include in the local plan. And thirdly, that Strategic Planning Committee consider the key concepts highlighted in paragraph 2.6 of the report and agrees to incorporate these into the employment strategy for the new local plan. Members, those of you in the chamber, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion. Press your red cross if you are against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you are abstaining from the vote.
And for the benefit of those watching online, the vote is now taking place. And Chair, I have 8 now votes for, no votes against and no abstentions. So Chair, that is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with that, we'll call that lunch. So adjourn the meeting. We'll come back just. just
Yeah.
after 2 o'clock.
Chair, just before we do, just on the, I'm sorry to come back on this, on the subject of the vote. Did we vote, and it may be that I misheard on this, the vote was in relation to the conclusions in, no, it was, Shirley said it was 2.6, but did she mean 6.2? Because I don't think there is a 2.6, is there? It should have been 6.2. I thought
6.2. Yeah.
I think
Apologies.
I think
a senior
it was,
moment.
It's getting a little bit late in the day.
Yeah, just wanted to be safe.
But yeah, it's 6.2 just to be sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. All right.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Bailey.
Sorry, I was just going to ask. Do we have to have 50 minutes for lunch? Because then the meetings. I mean, we're going to be here till. Can we have a shorter? I mean, I don't know what other committee members or you think as chair, but can we have a maybe a slightly shorter lunch, half an hour, so that then we can. Is that? I don't know what anybody else thinks. Oh, okay.
Chair? Sorry, can you confirm what time we'll be coming back so we can put the slide up?
Can we go in between the two and say 10 to 2?
Yeah.
And then that's
okay.
40 minutes. And then.
Okay, Chair. Great.